Hi, I'm Jim McCann, founder of 1-800-Flowers. We created this podcast to share the wonderful people we get to interact with, we get to meet, we get to know, and most importantly, get to learn from. So I invite you to join us on this journey here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast. So Professor Jonah Berger, how are you today?
Doing all right.
You're in the wonderful state of North Carolina you mentioned earlier?
I am, yes.
But you grew up in the suburbs of DC, Jonah?
I did, yes.
And now spending some time in the wonderful city of brotherly love.
I am, yes.
So, Jonah, you're a professor at the Wharton School of Business at University of Pennsylvania. Wow, that's quite an accomplishment. Tell us about your school career from Washington, D.C.
Yeah, so I actually was in a math science, computer science magnet program. I thought I was going to be an environmental engineer. I went to college thinking that that's what I was going to study. I came across kind of psychology and sociology and the social sciences and thought, wouldn't it be neat to apply those same rigorous tools of experimentation and data analysis to human behavior? And so started doing research there in the psych department, ended up getting interested enough to do a PhD, which I did at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and then got my first job at Wharton.
This suggests to me that you might be a big brain person. I mean, Stanford PhD, School of Business, probably the toughest school to get into right now in the country, according to young people and the kids of young people that I know applying to different schools. Business school in particular, tough to get into, right?
It is. I may have gotten in there when it wasn't so difficult to get into. I've been fortunate to work with a lot of great people and have a lot of great mentorship over the years, and have learned a lot from those folks.
But being a math and computer science major, it seems like quite a turn to say that I'm going to become a linguist.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is human behavior is a science, just like physics is a science, just like biology is a science. And I actually took a course in high school called R&E, which was research and experimentation. And we weren't doing social science experiments. We were doing things with physics and material science and other things along those lines. But those tools of sort of building a hypothesis, collecting data to test that hypothesis, I've applied them to understanding human behavior. Just like there are rules to physics and chemistry and biology, there are rules to why we behave the way that we do. In
studying those rules, has the math background really come in handy in terms of the back-end science work?
It certainly hasn't hurt. I don't do a lot of deep math in what I do, but I certainly do some statistics. And I think that understanding data analysis is really key, right? Understanding how likely things are to happen by chance versus not is certainly important.
And I know you've had 4 best-selling books, and your most recent book is called Magic Words. And like your previous books, Contagion, Invisible Influence, and The Catalyst, on its way to being a bestseller already. There's a theme there in terms of your interest and how you look at things. And being a native of the DC area, growing up in the Virginia suburbs there, certainly exposed a lot to politics in your young life. When you think as you began your science career and understanding why things catch on and understanding why words make a difference and how the brain receives those as a result of the filters we've developed in our lifetime, do you think back and say, oh my goodness, that political move was brilliant, or boy, way back when that particular campaign really blew it when they allowed themselves to get outflanked linguistically here?
Yeah, what's interesting is when people think about human behavior and they think about sort of, the factors that shape human behavior, the fact that it leads us to buy, this type of dish soap or this type of car, or this type of clothing, that's fine. But we would think that, for big, important decisions like political decisions, a completely different thought process is involved. And unfortunately, it's just the opposite, right? The way we make political decisions are shaped by the same factors, conscious or non-conscious, rational or seemingly irrational, that shape what we buy in all aspects of our lives.
So we should think of it as just another product decision we're making.
I like to think of almost everything we do as in some sense, a product decision. When we donate money, right? Yes. We are a customer. We're not buying anything, but we're choosing to donate money. When we make a choice of what house to buy, when we make a choice of where to send our kids to school, when we make a decision about whether to exercise or not, all of those are cases where we are making choices, and those choices are shaped by the things in our environment. often without our awareness.
When I've heard you speak about your work in magic words or gone through the book myself, I'm reminded at 1-800-Flowers in our earliest years, a little discovery we made about how you couch things, how you manage expectations is critically important. And a little example I'll share with you is that in terms of customer service, a customer would call and say, the flowers didn't get delivered. It was going to a school, and I think she might have left early that day. Can you check on that for me? Our reps at that time would say, I'll check on that and get right back to you. That was a mistake on our part from a language point of view because we weren't managing expectations properly. So that person would hang up the phone and sit there and watch it. Or if it was a mobile device, they'd be staring at it because we said, we're going to get right back to you. When we changed the vocabulary and managed the expectations differently, the response time was the same. We said, we'll get back to you in an hour.
Yes.
Now the customer could relax and realize that they had 60 minutes to wait and to expect the return. We fully expected to get back to them in less than an hour to exceed their expectation, but it changed our customer satisfaction scores dramatically just by managing the expectation better.
I think that's a great example. And as you talked about sort of, shifting that expectation and also beating that expectation. You said often it might be 15 minutes, it might be 20 minutes. It's not going to be a full 60, but by setting it up and then beating it, you're certainly improving that customer satisfaction. We've done a lot of work recently on the language of customer satisfaction. And there are a lot of important ways that we can shape language, subtle shifts, just like what you talked about, that can really increase our impact.
The other lesson from our history, I don't know if it plays into your research at all, but you'll be shocked to hear this, Professor Berger, but men are not really good at expressing themselves around emotions and love moments. I know you're shocked.
Yes, shocked. Shocked.
I remember being in our service center. This is many years ago. And I moving up and down behind the people on different phones. And I saw this one young lady, and she was terrific. I could see her in my memory right now. And she had a big smile on her face, and she was helping customers before Valentine's Day. And the big push was guys wanted delivered on Valentine's Day at 9 o'clock in the morning. Well, and they said, well, I called early. I called at 8 o'clock. No, early would have been a week ago.
Yeah.
And I saw her, and she's writing things down. And there's not a lot of reason to write things down because everything is on computer screens. And so after a call, I went over and said, how you doing? We're chatting. I said, what are you writing down? And she goes, she's the one who clued me in to the fact that men aren't real good at expressing themselves. And so when I hear a good card message, I edit it and save it and use it for a customer. And she said, customer was sending an order of flowers and it was going to be to the office. Valentine's Day that year was on a Friday. And she was suggesting that he send it on Tuesday, Wednesday at the latest. And that way she could enjoy them the week. And being a woman herself, she said, and we like to show off that we were remembered and we're loved in front of our friends and coworkers. And she'd have several days to enjoy them then. And what I would suggest they say on the card is, I couldn't wait until the 14th to tell you how much I love you. And I said, well, how many people that you offer that suggestion to take it? She goes, no one hasn't taken it yet. But helping people to express themselves is a challenge we'll have forever, I would assume. And when you work with your student population, I would assume your teaching satisfaction scores are really high because you're giving them tools to understand business, giving them tools to understand human behavior, giving them tools to manage their lives better.
Yeah. I think we often think it's random luck or chance why certain things happen, but it's not. There's really a science behind it. And if we understand that science, we can make ourselves happier and we can deepen our relationships. I love both the examples you gave about managing those expectations, right? Coming on Tuesday could be terrible because it's 3 days in advance, or it could be an opportunity to express how much you love someone, and taking the same thing and framing it better can really increase its impact.
When I was looking at your book, I couldn't help but remember some of those examples and taking some examples of how we could say things better today to achieve our goals. And I love that you said we're all in pursuit of having more, better, and deeper relationships.
Yeah.
I think if you look among your student population or your fellow professors there at Wharton, those who are happiest have the most and best relationships. And it's not always a numbers game, but our key to all our happiness is to have deeper and better relationships. And some of us are working toward that all the time, and some of us forget that it takes work.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very interesting also hearing what you're talking about. I think some of us say, okay, if we talk to people more often, that'll deepen the social connection. But it's really not just about talking to them. And that's important, obviously, having that connection. But it's what you do with that time. So much. I have a cousin who's a good friend of mine that I talk to often. And so much about the depth of that relationship is making sure we don't just say hi, how are you? We don't just talk about, but we reveal a little bit about our own personal lives, about what's going on, about how we're doing. And I think, sometimes people think, oh, my professional life is something to manage, but my personal life is just fine. It'll just be great. I don't have to manage those relationships. But you do, right? I mean, whether it's a marriage, whether it's a friendship, everything is better when you invest in it, not just the stock market, but our own personal lives. And so I think the more we understand about how to invest in those relationships, the more we can really reap the rewards of them and have more satisfying interactions.
Boy, what you say is so important, Professor. I remember I wasn't a great student, but I had some great professors in school. And I went to City University, New York, John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And I was a psychology major there. On my way, I thought, to become a New York City policeman. My career path changed and I didn't, but it was a great experience and great training there. And I didn't think I learned that much, but years later, I remembered a psychologist, I think he was in 30s or 40s, named Claude Steiner. And Claude Steiner offered a school of thought about the contact economy. And what he did was he put mathematics to relationships. Yeah. And what he found was the more people gave, or you just mentioned invested, it was like the opposite of a bank account. The more you gave out, the more you had in your account. So we all know people in our lives who are givers. They're always giving of themselves, and they seem to have more and better relationships. And I think some of the things you talk about in your book, Magic Words, reminded me of that idea that the more you do conscious to help other people get to the right place, the happier you're going to be, the better your relationships are going to be. And I think of the example you gave with young children being asked to clean up after themselves.
Yeah. A few years ago, some researchers from Stanford were interested in, I think, a problem that all of us have, right? Which is we want someone to help us with something. We want someone to do something. How can we get them to say yes? And so to study this question, they went to a local preschool and they asked 4 and 5-year-olds to help clean up the classroom. So there were blocks on the floor, there were crayons everywhere, it was a mess. And they asked the kids for help cleaning up. But they changed the language that they used for different kids. So for some kids, they used the language that we might often use, saying, hey, can you help clean up? And for other kids, they used a slightly different approach. They said, hey, can you be a helper? Now, the difference between help and helper is quite small. It's only a couple of letters. Yet the kids that were asked to be a helper rather than just help were about 30% more likely to actually go ahead and help. And it's not just kids in classrooms. You could say, oh, that's nice, these kids cleaned up, but I'm an adult, I care about big, important things. More recently, some researchers looked at voting. They said, hey, voting's a big consequential behavior. Can we get more people to turn out to vote by using subtle shifts in language? Some people were asked, hey, would you go vote? And other people were asked, hey, will you be a voter? Now, again, the difference between vote and voter is quite small, literally a letter, right? Just adding the R to the end. Yet that one letter led to about a 15% increase in the proportion.
Which is dramatic.
Dramatic. 15% increase in the proportion of people that voted. And the reason why, it's all about turning actions into identities, right? Yes, we know we should take certain actions. Yes, we know we should help others, but we get busy. What we care about more, though, than specific actions are desired identities.
Desired identities.
Desired identity, yes.
Yep.
Smart and competent and helpful and intelligent and all those things. And so if actions become an opportunity to hold those, to reify, to sort of support those desired identities, we're more likely to take those actions. Helping, sure, is fine, but if helping is an opportunity to be a helper, if I'm a little kid, well, wow, a helper is a big, important thing. I want to be a helper. I'm more likely to do it. If I'm an adult, voting, sure, I know I should, but if voting is an opportunity to be a voter, hold this desirable identity, something I care about, I'm more likely to do it. And so by turning actions into identities, we can encourage people to take desired action.
In your practice beyond the classroom, do you work with people who are running campaigns or trying to move a body politic in a certain direction on a proposition? Do you help them with language as part of your professional services?
Certainly. I work with lots of companies and organizations, everything from big Fortune 500s like the Googles and Nikes and Apples of the world to small startups, have worked with political campaigns, nonprofits, a variety of different organizations, really to sharpen messaging and increase impact, help products, services, and ideas catch on by better understanding human behavior.
Well, I would expect, especially having read a good chunk of Magic Words, that your services are in high demand, because as a group, we're not great at this.
I thought your comment about sort of men not being good at expressing themselves, in some sense, is true of people in general with language, right? We all know someone in our lives who we think of as a great speaker or a great writer, right? We think when they open their mouths, everybody listens, and many of us wish that we could be that person. But it turns out this isn't a skill that you're born with. Sure, certain people are naturally better, but it's a skill that we can all learn, right? I mean, we are all speakers. We may not be politicians who get up and speak to millions of people, but we all speak at meetings or to our families. We're all writers. We might not write novels, but we all write emails and pitches and PowerPoint decks. And so by understanding the science of language, by understanding how magic words work, we can all increase our impact both at home and at work.
A friend of mine sent me, I heard you on Daniel Pink's podcast, and I'm a fan of Daniel. And someone else sent me a copy of a talk you gave when your book, Contagion, was out. And I love the way you started your talk with this exercise. And then after you completely owned the audience and dragged them in and realized that it was participatory and you were genuinely interested in their thoughts, you already owned the stage. And then you said, oh, by the way, I'm Professor Jonah Berger, and I wrote a book. I thought it was one of the, you talk about speakers, and not everyone, it's not a born art, it's something you learn. I thought that was a very wonderful, warm way to engage with an audience so that it's more pleasurable, more of a learning experience, and more meaningful to you and the audience.
Yeah, I'll tell a personal story. I mean, I am not particularly good at public speaking. I don't love it that much. I find it very difficult and challenging, but I've worked at it.
But you're really good at faking it.
I've gotten better at it, right? In college, I actually took an acting class, and I took an improv class, not because I'm good at improv, right? The 6 people who've ever seen me do improv will say that I'm terrible at it. That's why no more than 6 people have seen me do improv. But it's a type of thing where because you're bad at it, you get better. You learn what it means to sort of take other people's suggestions and build on ideas. And so, in all aspects of life, I think practice can really help us get a lot better.
Clearly, and that goes toward relationships and relationship building too. And I would imagine that there's probably a handful of terms that you would use to help people think about sharpening their communication skills, let's say on stage. And I assume authenticity would be on that list.
I think, authenticity and a little bit of revealing things about ourselves as well. There's a whole chapter in the book about emotion and the power of emotional language. And one thing I point out there is, often we think the best way to present ourselves is to just present a highlight list, right? Here are all the great things that have happened to me. But the problem is when you hear someone say all the great things that have happened to them and everything they talk about makes it seem like their life is wonderful, it's a little bit hard to connect with them, right? Because for most of us, our lives are good, but they're not perfect unless it's on social media. And indeed, research shows that, interacting with others who you've seen share both positive and negative information makes us like them more, makes us relate to them more, and makes us feel like we can do it in our own lives, right? If you look at, great stories, you look at great storytellers, great stories often have an arc like this, right? They go up and they go down. They go positive and then negative again, and positive and negative. Why? Because it makes the content more engaging, right? Seeing the hero overcome some great difficulty makes us believe in her or him even more, right? Makes us want to find out what's going to happen next. And the same is true in our own personal lives, telling our own personal stories. As leaders, if all we talk about our successes, everyone listening goes, that's not me. I can't relate. My life isn't that wonderful. But we say, look, I failed at this and I failed at this, and then I finally succeeded. Everyone can go, wow, not only is this a better story, but it makes me believe that I can do it too.
When you're in a meeting, maybe running a meeting, and we've learned this lesson at everything I've done, whether it was running a home for boys, which I did in the first part of my career, or running flowers, or being involved at Worth Media. The same lesson we learned early on is true today, which is if you would ask people at the end of a meeting, what they thought of the meeting. Their percentage of positivity about the meeting is just directly correlated to the amount of time that they spoke. And if people were in the meeting and didn't say a word, they didn't have a good impression of the meeting and they didn't enjoy the meeting.
Yeah.
But if they were, and so that goes to the point you make in the book about using questions.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to break the ice. It's a great way to get a conversation started. It's a great way to learn. And you use it in terms of both asking questions and then the follow-on question.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about the power of questions, how it helps you to show genuine concern and genuine engagement, and how that tool might work.
I think many of us use questions to collect information, right? We ask questions when we want to collect information, but questions do a lot more than that. There's some very nice research, for example, that shows that most of us don't ask for advice because we're worried that people will think less of us. They'll think we don't know anything or we're not very competent. Turns out the exact opposite is true. Asking for advice actually makes us seem more competent and more skilled. Why? Well, basically because everyone likes feeling like they give good advice. And so when someone asks them for their advice, they go, wow, you must be a really smart person because of all the people you could have asked, you asked me. And so you value my advice, you must be a pretty smart person. And so, but questions do even more than that. They shape how we're perceived. They shape the course of conversation, right? They're a good way to direct attention to one thing rather than something else. And they're a great way to engage an audience of any sort. A couple of years ago, I was talking to a startup founder. She was having trouble motivating her team. Wanted them to put in extra hours, to spend time at work, more time. They didn't want to do it. They were tired. They were burnt out. She was pushing them. They didn't want to. So she calls a meeting and she says, hey, what kind of company do we want to be? A good company or a great company? And that's a rhetorical question, but everybody goes, oh, a great company.
Got people involved, got them thinking and realizing that what they had to say was important to her.
Yeah. How do we get there? How do we become a great company, right? She asked a real question. And then they start having a conversation. What questions do is a few things that are important, right? First, when we make statements, when we push, people push back, right? Often when people listen to other people speak, they counter argue. They say, oh, yes, but. Think about all the reasons they don't want to do what someone's suggesting. When you ask questions, you deactivate that anti-persuasion radar. Because now rather than pushing back against what you're saying, people are thinking about, wow, I like sharing my opinion. I'm happy to share my opinion with you. But second is, as you nicely said, questions allow us to collect information. Too often as leaders, as communicators, we don't know enough about the audience whose mind we're trying to change. Questions allow us to collect information that increase our impact. But then third, as you alluded to very nicely, questions allow people to participate, right? It allows them to feel like they're part of something. If an idea is just yours, well, someone might say, okay, that's your idea. Why am I going to support it? But if it's theirs, if they feel ownership of it, if they've participated in the process or outcome, they're much more interested. And so, asking questions and actually listening to the answers can be great not only to collect information, to deactivate that radar, but also involve an audience so they are bought in and want to see it succeed.
Maybe you determine early on in a conversation that this isn't going to have the outcome you wanted. But my approach is the person sitting across from me, even if we're not going to get to where I thought, but I want to spend an appropriate amount of time with that person anyway. Getting involved in a dialogue can be beneficial to me and to both of us if I can learn something new about how they're thinking, about their impressions. So spending that time in thoughtful dialogue around questions can sometimes yield surprisingly good information or insights that maybe not on subject, but a good use of your time and their time.
Yeah, I think asking questions is a skill that, none of us have taken a class on how to ask questions or how to ask the right questions, but it's really an important skill to develop.
We put our heart into everything we do. We are farmers, bakers, florists, and makers who grow and create with a passion. Made with love at every step of the way. Because at the end of the day, we know you're sending more than a gift. 1-800-Flowers, share with love.
A minute ago, you talked about the anti-persuasion radar. Beep, beep, beep. Tell us what we're talking about here.
Oh, yeah. So, this is from my last book, Before Magic Words, The Catalyst, where I talk a lot about reactance. And so often when people feel pushed, they push back, right? When we're pitching something in a meeting, when we're selling something to a client, even when we're talking to our spouse or kids, they're not just listening. They're going, I realize you're trying to persuade me. Got this anti-persuasion radar. Whenever I detect a persuasion attempt, I engage in defensive measures to avoid being persuaded. Think about when an ad comes on the television, right? Think about a salesperson calls you. You hang up the phone, you change the channel, you throw away the piece of mail. If you feel like someone's trying to convince you, you avoid being persuaded. Even worse, you counter argue, you push back. You think about all the ways it's not going to work.
Well, I love good definition, and that's good definition I'll never not have in my bank now, knowing about the anti-persuasion radar outcome. That's really, really interesting. When I think of great messaging, I think of people who could turn a phrase, and I'm a fan and friendly with a fellow who is a pollster, a political analyst. His name is Frank Luntz. Does a lot of work around Washington, does a lot of work for Fox and for CNN. And he's a fellow who worked with Newt Gingrich back in 1994, I think, to develop the Contract with America. And I find that he is so thoughtful and clever about how messaging and the branding within the messaging is so important. I think it was he who said the Republicans shouldn't talk about the estate tax, they should talk about the death tax.
Yeah. Yes.
Tell us from your experience where business people or people in the political spectrum have been very clever about their vocabulary.
I think what you're really talking about is about framing.
Yes.
So what is this tax? I'm a consumer. I'm a person in the United States. I don't know what this tax is going to mean. When I think of the estate tax, who do I think of? I think of
rich people. Rich
people, right? I think of the monopoly person or whatever it is. The estate tax. That's not going to affect me. When I think about the death tax, that sounds terrible, right? I mean, everyone knows they're going to. I think about the Grim Reaper, and so the ideas that come to mind are quite different. And this more broadly, stepping outside this example, language is a great way of shaping what comes to mind in others, right?
Yes.
Just think about the word death versus estate, right? The word tax after is the same, but death and estate, very different ideas come to mind.
Yes.
And so as communicators, we have a big opportunity to shape the way people perceive our ideas, whether in a workplace or in a home context, by the language we use. You use the word branding, but really, brand ideas, shape how people think about political ideas, taxes, products, services, even suggestions based on the language we use around them.
I'm reminded another psychologist who I'm a fan of and now a friend of. His name is Dr. George Everly, and he's a very, very thoughtful, learned man with the most extraordinary career. But he wrote a piece in Psychology Today back in 2020 that I just thought was terrific. It was about relationships. And as a student of relationships and the things that we need to do to invest in and develop relationships, I thought it was such a moving piece. I copied it. I passed it around. I wrote him a note saying, I thought this piece was terrific. It's had a big impact on me and the people around me already. And I titled it a fan letter. And he wrote to me, he said, I got your letter. It was terrific. And we had a nice conversation. He said, someday I'd like to chat with you. I see you said someday I hope we get to chat. Me too. Why would you want to chat with me? So I called him. We had a nice long chat, and we become friends now. And we were collaborating on some different things. But he said the fact that you wrote it as a fan letter, most people wouldn't do that. But I said that's generally what it was. I was a fan of you and your work, and that just pointed to me that words matter so much. And if you're not afraid to invest, take a chance in your vocabulary or in your gestures. So I have 3 adult children, and I have 7 grandchildren, and they will tell you, thank you. I'm a very, very lucky person. They would tell you that I preach to them all the time. Most people I know are shy, and I was shy as a kid, and I'm still in recovery, but working really hard at it. And my kids are all a bit on the shy side. And my point to them was, when you're shy, one of the things you should do, let's say you go to those famous business cocktail parties, and you get there and you really don't know anybody else in the room. I've always counseled them to behave like a host. Put yourself in a role, even if you're not, looking for the person in the room who's struggling socially, and your job is to go make them comfortable.
Mm.
So you see the person standing alone on the side of the room with a glass of seltzer in their hand and sort of trying not to make eye contact with them when they're clearly uncomfortable. Take it upon yourself to go over, stick out your hand, and say, hello, how are you? I just wanted to introduce myself. And you'll see them physically relax and engage and all of a sudden accept your life preserver. And all of a sudden now you're not focused on your being uncomfortable anymore, because your mission is to help other people.
Yeah.
And I preach that all the time, and I still live it all the time.
Yeah.
So we just had a wonderful at Worth Media. We had a Techonomy Climate Conference. And I love it now because here we have 250 people, speakers event the night before, and I'm around the room looking for the person who's not in a conversation. And my job is to go get them, make them feel comfortable, bring them to a conversation, get them off, hand them off, make sure they're engaged in a good situation, and then go find the next person or move it this way. And I'm like the whirling dervish. It's because I've come to really love that role. Yeah. And when I sit down with our staff at Worth Media and the Techonomy team, and I did a class before time saying our job is to be host here. So there's a dozen of us, we're going to have 250 people. Our job is to make sure each of those people has a really comfortable, good learning experience. And exposing yourself by going up to somebody, which if you're not in the role is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But if you're in the role of host, it's what you're charged with doing. You have a job. It's why as a kid, Professor, my first job where you got paid anything for it was as a bartender. Why? It put you at the center of the conversation. You had a natural role in that social environment that you had to play. And you learn a lot of skills at working in a service environment, how to make other people feel comfortable. Oh, and lo and behold, along the way, you get comfortable too.
That is such a great example. It's funny. I actually was a host at one point in time and a waiter, partially for the same reason. But I love your point about how if you're sitting there going, hey, I'm not good at this, right? Then you don't do it. But if you're sitting going, hey, I have a job. My job is to help someone else.
Yes.
Not only do you feel good because you're helping someone else, but it doesn't matter whether you're good at this or not. It matters whether someone else needs help. As long as someone else needs help, most people want to go, oh, great, I'm happy to help them. I love what you said, how that helps people get out of their own challenges. And I think roles, inhabiting roles can be a really powerful way to move beyond some of our personal challenges. You know, people talk about faking it till you make it, same sort of thing. It may not be natural for you, but inhabit a role, right? You are this person. What would this person do? What would someone who is in this role do? And it doesn't matter whether you personally, it's the easiest thing you find or it's the most difficult thing you find. Inhabiting that role can help you do better.
You know, it's funny that you said to hear you say that, and you mentioned earlier that when you were in college, you took an acting class and an improv class. And in our training with our customer service reps, we hire people who have been actors, usually from university setting. So they're in the theater programs. And I remember one young man who taught for us for years. And he'd take a group of people who were green. He says, you may not be the most personable person in the world. You may even be a miserable son of a gun, but I'm going to teach you how to fake it. And he'd get them laughing and drop their guard. And he said, you know, your job is to make the person that you're interacting with feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And he taught them, you know, dead air time is uncomfortable. Find your thing. What are you going to talk about? Yeah. You and I chatted about the fact that you're in North Carolina in the beginning. He'd teach each of us to develop our tool, whether it was the weather or geography or schools, whatever it is, to engage, to invest in the dialogue. And you talk a lot about agency and identity in your book.
Language is important for the things you just said, right? Words don't just suggest information or who has to do what. It's just what it means to engage in a particular action. We talked about the example of, you know, helping versus being a helper, but there's many things like this.
Running versus being a runner. Right,
running versus being a runner. There's some very nice work showing, you know, when we're stuck on a tough problem, we often think about what we should do. We say, oh, you know, what should I do in this situation? Turns out a very subtle shift, think about what we could do instead, makes us much more creative. Why? Because we're not only focused on one narrow answer, like there's only one way to get out of this situation. It encourages us to think more broadly, explore the possibilities, and come up with a better solution overall. And so language is a powerful way to change how we see things, change how others see things as well, and reach better outcomes.
Now, we talked a lot about business settings, but where is language more important than in a love, a romance, partnership relationship?
Yeah, I certainly agree. And you know, I wrote the book both to be useful for folks at work and at home. And I think many of the same tools can be applied. There's some great research I talk about on the power of questions to building social connection, right? How you can use the right questions to help us connect with anyone in our lives. You know, some researchers did some really nice work on questions to help build social connection. And the challenge goes a little something like this. Most of us have social interactions where we talk about relatively surface things. How was your day? The sports thing, this thing in the news. Why? Because it's easy. We might want to have deeper and more.
And it's rote.
Yeah, that's fair. And we may want to have deeper, more revealing interactions. But the challenge is it's hard to walk up to someone and start that conversation, right? Even your spouse, even your best friend, you can't start the conversation by saying, you know, what do you think about this big, important political issue? Or, you know, how do you feel about your parents, this and that? It's difficult to move to those things. And so we want to get to those deeper, more meaningful things, but we can't start conversations with them. How do we get there? And so what they show is there's a series of questions, starting safely with the basic sort of getting to know you things, but slowly moving towards revealing things about us that make us feel that social connection, that make us feel more comfortable with revealing more difficult and deeper things. Because the challenge is we can't start with the deeper stuff, but if we never get there, we don't have the benefit. And so it's almost laddering the questions on top of each other, starting more basic and simpler and easy, but revealing little bits of ourselves and reciprocally doing that back and forth helps us build to deeper connection.
But it sounds like there's an investment there. You're investing by light revelation yourself, by taking that chance.
It's reciprocal, very much. You can't just ask more difficult questions of others. Part of it is sort of revealing some about yourself, and then that will make others more comfortable revealing a little bit more about themselves, which makes you more comfortable revealing a little more about yourself, which make them more comfortable. And so you build on each other to get to these deeper,
The goal is to have more genuine, more fulfilling relationships.
Exactly. More genuine and fulfilling interactions with anyone. Maybe relationships with someone you know well, maybe a stranger you're sitting next to on the plane, right? That you sit with for 3 hours and you leave and you feel like you're best friends. It's figuring out you can't go to the deep stuff right away, but if you only stay surface, you don't get those benefits.
And do you find difference in gender, difference in other diversities among us, that some people have an easier time than others? Is it cultural? Is it geographical? You might have been able to notice I'm from New York and I'm from Queens in particular, school in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Is it harder for us because we have a chip on our shoulder?
You know, I think some of this is the norms in the culture we grew up in, whether that be, East Coast culture versus Midwest culture, whether it be American culture versus East Asian culture, the kind of expectations and the things we bring to our interactions. You know, my family's actually from New York as well. And so, I certainly have that in my blood. There are many good things about it. But people from New York are not always the most giving folks, right? They're often sort of more tactical, organized, deliberate individuals. Whereas sometimes, other folks are more caring and more giving. And so it's really about knowing where you came from, understanding how that shaped who you are, and recognizing that there's variation among others as well.
My wife and I have a home on the west coast of Florida, in the Naples area, and we love to walk on the beach. And I described to my New York friends, I said, oh my goodness, the people down here are so weird. I said, the other day we were walking on the beach and another couple came walking the other way and they said hello. They're so weird here.
Yes.
It's just really nice that the people you walk past say hello.
It is. That's one thing I love about North Carolina. People here say hello to one another. And so, it's really about taking these opportunities to build. There's very nice research, for example, that shows, on the subway or in other interactions, when you're sitting in a cab, we have this tendency not to talk to the other person there because we think it'll interrupt them or they won't like it. They actually like it and we like it as well. We get a lot out of social interactions if we do the work to build those interactions.
I think that's an important point as well. Now, you had an interesting acronym in your book to give people tools when they're without your book, magic words in their hand, or as they read through the book, to take away so that they can be working on the techniques and investment opportunities that you create for us with your with what you teach us in your book. Tell us about the 6 key types and how that acronym works.
Yeah, so I like to organize it in terms of an acronym, which is the word SPEAK. The S is the language of similarity and difference. The P is the language of posing questions. The E is the language of emotion. The A is the language of agency and identity. And then rather than a K, I have 2 C's. The first is the language of confidence, and the second is the language of concreteness. And these are really 6 buckets or types of magic words that if we understand how to use them, we can increase our impact both in our professional lives and our professional lives.
Now, see, old people like me, we react to the changing vocabulary around us.
Yeah.
And we get particularly vexed at things that we used to say that were appropriate and we're not allowed to say now.
Yeah, I mean, language norms certainly change over time. And I think the key thing is to realize that different people come from different backgrounds. You know, what is normal for one person may be okay for them, but may not be okay for someone else. And so I think in the modern workplaces that we live in and the modern interactions we have to be aware that different people have different expectations and meanings behind things. I was talking recently, it was funny, I was talking to a group of journalists, and I was talking to a German journalist, and he was saying, God, the US is so funny. I thought someone had said yes to an interview from me, and they actually said no, but they were so polite about it and kind of indirect that I didn't realize they had said no. He was used to sort of more German, very direct way of being. And so whether it's norms across cultures or norms within cultures, really understanding those norms and backgrounds that others are coming from is quite important.
Finally, I'd like to ask you about, we kidded about us men being less than skilled at expressing ourselves around emotional situations. But there's a topic of conversation that's been on my mind and in several of my conversations recently. And with your work in the book, Magic Words, and the work that you do at the university, I wonder if you could shed some light. And the topic I'm talking about is the idea of adult male relationships.
Yeah.
And as I get older, and my wife and I discuss the fact that our circle of friends, you have to be conscious of the fact that it's going to shrink over time. For bad reasons and not so bad reasons, it just shrinks. You lose friends, people move away. We live in the New York area on Long Island, and all of a sudden friends are moving to Florida full time. Wow, your circle's narrowing. And then you realize there really is an importance to male relationships. And I was speaking with a medical friend of mine recently who said over the course of his 40-year career, he always asks his male patients how many good friends they have.
Yeah.
And he says the number's been declining as the population and his community ages. And he says, I think it's not just that. I think it's that we have fewer friends. Yes, we have social media. Yes, we have more reasons for contact. But the idea of close personal friendship, maybe social media and text can aid and abet relationships, but sometimes it might hurt it too. And he said, on average, over the course of 40 years, the number is 1.
I mean, it certainly is hard to keep up relationships as we age. People have lots of friends in younger years. If you look at the data, who people spend time with, they eventually find a partner, then they have children, they put a bunch of time into those children, particularly when the children leave, often people are going, wow, do I still have those relationships that I used to have? And I think that can really be an important source of joy, but it's important to maintain it. Social media is great for keeping up with people. Does it allow us to have those deep conversations? I think we need to make time and space for those deeper conversations, not just being aware of what everyone is doing, but really having the time to connect and interact with others. And so, it's not social media's problem. We need to make the time to have those interactions, to whether it's a half hour phone call or getting together with lunch or, playing poker or sports or whatever it is, making the time in our lives for those interpersonal interactions, just like we do for other things.
Well, I think your work around vocabulary and its power is particularly important on this subject, because you can have superficial friends where you talk about the light things, but then there's the investment that you spoke about, which is exposing a little bit of yourself to realize, to communicate to the person who is a friend, who you'd like to potentially be a friend, to show that you're going to expose yourself emotionally to invest in that potential relationship. And that's all about vocabulary and investment.
I couldn't agree more.
Dr. Jonah Berger, I knew I'd love talking to you because I love reading your work and seeing you present in different circumstances. You have so many valuable lessons for us here in our daily lives, in our social lives, our family lives, our business lives. I think it's required reading. And I think that you're developing a community of us followers of you that's growing bigger and will be around for a long, long time, because what you do gives us the tools to have better and more meaningful lives.
Well, thank you so much. Not only have I enjoyed this conversation, but I've taken away a couple tidbits that I know are going to make my life more enjoyable. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jonah. Thanks for sharing your great work with us.
It's my sister's birthday.
Go to 1-800-Flowers.com.
They have tons of great birthday gifts.
Wow.
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 Happy birthday, baby.
Wow.
Yummy. I got to contain myself.
1-800-Flowers.
Celebrate the people you love.
Well, I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and I know I'll be sharing it forward. I hope you get to as well. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow me along on Twitter at Jim1800Flowers and on LinkedIn at Jim McCann. Hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to Celebrations Chatter. You can join our community by reaching out at chatter@celebrations.com. And while you're at it, tell us what topics you'd like us to explore here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to share it forward.